Close your eyes, dear listener. Let the noise of the day melt away. Allow each breath to slow, like a soft breeze drifting through ancient ruins. Tonight, we set sail to Cleopatra's final night. The Nile did not sleep that night. Its black waters rolled under a thin veil of moonlight, carrying secrets that only the gods could understand. Fishermen along the banks swore they heard whispers rising from the current, voices speaking in languages older than empires, older than Rome, older even than the pyramids themselves. In the palace at Alexandria, the torches still burned.
Cleopatra VII, Philopator, last of the Ptolemies, daughter of Isis, ruler of Egypt, stood alone on the marble balcony that overlooked her city. She had dismissed her handmaidens hours ago. Even Iris and Charmion, her most loyal companions, had been ordered to sleep.
But Cleopatra could not sleep. Not while the drums of Rome thundered beyond the city walls. Not while the fires of betrayal still burned behind her eyes. Not while Mark Antony, her Antony, lay bleeding somewhere below, dying for her, dying for a dream that had been doomed from the moment Octavian crossed the sea. The stars above Alexandria were sharp and bright, but to Cleopatra they looked like cold jewels, indifferent to the fate of a queen. Below the palace, the city screamed. Alexandria, jewel of the ancient world, city of libraries and lighthouses, of philosophers and poets, had become a tomb. Smoke rose from the docks, where Roman ships pressed in like wolves. The cries of her people echoed through the narrow streets, carried on the hot night air. Cleopatra did not move as her steward entered, breathless and pale. "Your Majesty," he said, voice trembling, "it is done. The city—" "I know," she said, her tone as calm as the still surface of the Nile. She turned her gaze on him, those famous eyes rimmed in kohl, sharp enough to cut stone. "And Antony?" The steward faltered, "Gravely wounded, but alive. For now." Cleopatra exhaled, slow and quiet, though the pounding of her heart betrayed her. She dismissed the man with a flick of her hand and moved back inside. The palace halls were empty, their silence broken only by the soft flicker of torches. She walked past murals that told the story of her ancestors, the rise of the Ptolemies, the gods who had blessed their line, and wondered if those gods had finally turned their faces away. At the far end of the hall, a statue of Isis awaited her. The goddess stood serene and eternal, carved from white stone, her outstretched arms as if ready to embrace her daughter. Cleopatra paused there, bowing her head. "Mother," she whispered in ancient Egyptian, a language few still spoke in her court, "if you ever loved me, stay with me tonight." The flames and the torches swayed, though there was no breeze. And somewhere, deep within the stone of the palace, something stirred. The chamber smelled of myrrh and iron. Antony lay on the marble floor, propped against a column, his armor half removed, his tunic dark with blood. His men had carried him from the battlefield, but they had left his dignity there, amid the bodies and broken standards. He had been Rome once, the lion of the legions, the storm at Actium, the man who could turn the tide of war with a single charge. Now, he was just a man, broken and bleeding, watching the cracks spread through the world he had tried to build. "Antony," Cleopatra whispered as she knelt beside him. His eyes fluttered open.
Even now they burned with that same reckless fire that had drawn her to him all those years ago, the fire of a man who could not imagine defeat. "You should not be here," he rasped, each word costing him. "Where else should I be?" She brushed the sweat from his brow, her hands steady though her pulse raged. "Do you think I will let you die alone, my love?" A bitter smile ghosted across his face. "Rome will take you. Octavian will parade you like a trophy." "Rome will have ashes," Cleopatra said sharply. "Nothing more."
The chamber darkened for a moment, though no cloud crossed the moon. Somewhere deep within the palace, the soft chime of a sistral, the sacred rattle of Isis, echoed faintly, though no hand touched the instrument. Cleopatra felt it. Antony felt it too. "Do you hear it?" she asked softly, though her voice trembled. Antony closed his eyes. "The gods," he murmured, "a man half in this world and half in another. They're waiting." Outside, the city roared. The gates had fallen. Octavian's soldiers poured through the streets, their armor gleaming like silver scales under the torchlight. Alexandria burned. From the balcony, Cleopatra could see the lighthouse, the great pharos of Alexandria, standing like a solitary sentinel against the chaos. She remembered climbing its steps as a girl, her father's hand in hers, the city sprawling below like a living map. Now that city was dying, and still the Nile whispered. By midnight, silence began to spread. Not the silence of peace, but of inevitability, the hush before the last act of a tragedy. In her private chambers, Cleopatra dismissed her attendants once more, though Charmian lingered in the doorway, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "My queen," Charmian said softly, "there is still time. Octavian, perhaps he will show mercy." Cleopatra turned, the gold in her gown catching the dim torchlight. Mercy. Rome does not know the word. She moved to the center of the chamber, where an ivory box rested on a low table. Inside, coiled in restless silence, was the asp, the sacred serpent, smooth and black as polished obsidian, its eyes reflecting the flicker of the torches like twin shards of midnight. They said the bite was quick, gentle even, the gods' embrace in the form of fangs. Cleopatra knelt before the serpent, her hand hovering just above the carved ivory lid. For a moment she thought of her children, Caesarion, Alexander, Selene, and something deep in her chest fractured. "Isis," she whispered, eyes closing, "if this is my fate, let it be swift." A breeze stirred the curtains, though the air was still. The torches bent toward her, their flames bowing as if in reverence. And from somewhere unseen, the goddess spoke, not in words, but in the quiet certainty that filled the room. The serpent moved. Its smooth obsidian body shifted in the ivory box, coiling lazily, its narrow head lifting as though it too understood the gravity of the moment. Cleopatra did not flinch. She had long stopped fearing pain. Instead, she studied the creature in silence, her gaze steady, her spine straight as a column of the great temple of Isis. She remembered the priest's words when she was a girl. "The serpent is not death, child. The serpent is the bridge between earth and the Duat, between power and peace."
Her fingers brushed the edge of the box. The cool ivory bit into her skin. Behind her, Charmian lingered, her breath shallow, her hands trembling at her sides. She wanted to speak, to beg, to plead, but she saw the queen's profile, sharp and regal even in despair, and her words withered in her throat. "My queen," Charmian whispered instead, "there is still a path if you surrender." Cleopatra turned, slow and deliberate, her gaze cutting through the half-light like a blade. "I am Cleopatra Philopator, daughter of Isis, queen of the two lands. Egypt bows to no man, and I will not bow in chains." Charmian's lips trembled, but she said nothing more. Outside, the palace trembled with the sounds of conquest. The marble floors shook with the march of Roman boots. The crash of doors being forced open echoed like distant thunder. Rome was coming, with their banners and their chains, their cold faces and colder swords. But inside, time seemed to slow. Cleopatra rose from her knees and crossed the chamber to where Antony lay, his breath shallow but even, his once mighty frame slumped in the corner like a fallen statue. She knelt beside him, her hand brushing a lock of sweat-damped hair from his brow.
"Antony," she whispered, her voice breaking for the first time. His eyes fluttered open, cloudy, but still fierce. "Cleopatra." His lips curved, just barely, into something like a smile. "Do not weep for me." "I will not," she said, though tears burned at the edges of her vision. "I will join you soon, and when I do, we will build a kingdom the gods themselves will envy." His hand moved, slow, unsteady, and found hers. His fingers, once strong enough to command legions, trembled against her palm. "You were my empire," Antony said. Then, with a shuddering breath, the lion of Rome fell silent. The silence after his death was absolute. Even the distant shouts of soldiers seemed to fade, leaving only the steady, mournful sound of the Nile moving beyond the palace walls. Cleopatra closed his eyes with a touch so gentle it broke Charmian's heart. For a long moment she did not move. Then she rose, every line of her body poised, regal, untouchable. The asp stirred again. The torches flickered violently, though there was still no breeze. The air thickened, heavy with the scent of myrrh and lotus. Cleopatra felt it before she saw it, the subtle shift in the room, the weight of unseen eyes upon her. From the shadows, she thought she saw her mother's face. Isis, eternal, radiant, her arms open as though to welcome her home. "Come, daughter," the goddess whispered, her voice soft as the Nile's tide. "The Duat waits. The throne is yours in eternity." Cleopatra's lips curved in the faintest smile. She turned to Charmian and Iris, her most loyal companions, and said, "Do not fear. The queen dies free." Her fingers reached for the box. The serpent, sensing its purpose, rose like a slow-moving ribbon of darkness, its tongue tasting the charged air. Charmian's sob broke the stillness, but she did not move forward. She did not dare interrupt the sanctity of the moment. Cleopatra lowered her arm, steady and unshaken, and offered her wrist. The serpent struck, swift, precise, divine. Pain flared, sharp and immediate, then softened into a spreading warmth. Cleopatra drew in a breath. The room swayed. The torches danced like stars. The last queen of Egypt sank gracefully to the floor beside Antony, her gaze lifting toward the carved ceiling where the gods were etched in gold and lapis. And as the poison bloomed in her veins, she thought not of Rome, nor of conquest, nor of chains. She thought only of the Nile and of the eternal river that waited beyond.
The world dimmed. The marble floor faded beneath her. The walls of the palace, the torchlight, the distant screams of conquest, all dissolved into shadow. And then there was the Nile. Not the Nile she had known, restless and muddy and loud with the chatter of the city, but something older, deeper. The water here glowed with an otherworldly light, silver and soft, as though the moon itself had been ground into dust and scattered across the surface. Cleopatra stood at its edge, barefoot, her gown flowing around her like white flame. The wound at her wrist was gone. The weight of her crown was gone. She was only herself now, not the queen, not the lover, not the pawn of empires, only Cleopatra. "Daughter!" The voice came from everywhere and nowhere at once, soft as a lullaby, heavy as a storm. She turned, and the goddess was there, Isis. She was taller than the tallest statue, her form shimmering with light that shifted like the desert heat. Her robes were white and gold, her crown the lunar disk flanked by horns that glowed like molten silver. Her eyes, those endless ancient eyes, held both sorrow and pride. Cleopatra fell to her knees. "Mother," she whispered, the old word slipping easily from her tongue, older than Greek, older than Rome. "Have I failed you?" Isis reached out, her touch warm as the Egyptian sun. "You were mortal, and yet you lived as a goddess. You loved as one too. There is no failure in that." Tears welled in Cleopatra's eyes, though they did not fall. She lifted her gaze to the river, its current slow and steady, winding into a horizon of endless twilight. "Is this the Duat?" she asked softly. Isis nodded. "The river between. Every soul must cross it, but for you, daughter, it is only the beginning."
A figure moved in the distance, across the glowing water. Tall, broad-shouldered, cloaked in the golden armor of Rome, though here it gleamed brighter, untouched by war or blood. His dark hair caught the light like polished obsidian, his eyes locked on hers. "Antony," she breathed. He smiled, that same reckless, impossible smile she had first seen in the great hall of Alexandria so many years ago. He held out his hand, waiting, patient. For the first time in hours, in years, Cleopatra felt her chest lighten. She stepped forward, the river cool against her bare feet, the water parting as though even here the Nile still knew its queen. Isis watched in silence as the lovers met at the center of the river. Antony's hands, strong again, closed over hers. "You found me," he said, his voice warm and steady. "I will always find you," Cleopatra whispered. The river carried them onward, its current slow and steady as the stars above began to shift. Constellations she knew, constellations she didn't, forming shapes older than empires. The Duat opened before them, endless and eternal. But even as they drifted, Cleopatra looked back, just once. She saw Alexandria burning, saw the smoke curling into the heavens, saw the city that had been her heart, and she whispered softly, "Remember me." The river swallowed the last fragments of the mortal world, carrying her into the light. The river narrowed. The silver waters that had carried Cleopatra and Antony smoothed into stillness until the current faded and the boat, if it was a boat, drifted to a stop. Before them rose gates taller than the great pylons of Karnak, carved from obsidian and gold, etched with hieroglyphs that glowed like molten fire. Two jackal-headed sentinels flanked the threshold, their spears crossed, eyes burning with pale, eternal light. Cleopatra felt Antony's hand tighten around hers. "Where are we?" he asked, his voice reverent. "The Hall of Ma'at," Cleopatra whispered, though the knowledge had not come from her, but from somewhere deeper, as though the river itself had whispered the answer. The place of judgment. The gates opened soundlessly. Inside, the hall stretched beyond sight, an endless corridor of polished stone and towering columns. At its center, a throne of radiant gold waited, and upon it sat Osiris, lord of the underworld, green-skinned and ageless, the crook and flail crossed over his chest, his eyes ancient and infinite. At his side, the goddess Ma'at, her feather of truth gleaming white as morning light. Behind her, Thoth, the scribe, his ibis head tilted, reed pen poised over a scroll that never seemed to end. The hall was silent, save for the steady beat of a drum that matched the rhythm of Cleopatra's heart. A voice deep as the earth itself filled the chamber. "Cleopatra Philopator, queen of the two lambs, daughter of the Nile." Cleopatra stepped forward. She did not kneel. Even here, in the presence of gods, her spine remained unbent. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and unwavering. Osiris regarded her, his gaze both heavy and weightless, as though he could see every thread of her life, from the child climbing the steps of the Pharos to the queen standing defiant before Rome. "Your heart will be weighed," Ma'at said, her tone neither kind nor cruel, only absolute. "It is weighed against the feather of truth, as is the way of all who pass through the Duat." Cleopatra nodded once. "Then weigh it." Thoth moved forward, his scroll unfurling like a ribbon of light inscribed with the story of her life, her triumphs, her betrayals, her loves, her wars. Every choice, every word, every breath laid bare. From the shadows, figures began to emerge, faces she had known in life. Her father, Ptolemy XII, watching with solemn eyes. Her siblings, some hateful, some hollow. Caesar standing silent, his laurel crown casting a shadow over his unreadable face. And Antony beside her, his presence a steady anchor in the shifting dark. Cleopatra felt the weight of her own heartbeat as the scales appeared, one pan gleaming gold, the other pure obsidian. Ma'at placed her feather on the first pan. "Speak your truth, daughter of Isis," the goddess said.
Cleopatra drew in a breath, her hands steady at her sides. I ruled my land as best I could, she said, her voice carrying through the vast hall. I loved as fiercely as I fought. I defied Rome when Rome sought to break us. If that is a sin, then let it be mine to bear. The scales trembled, the feather gleamed. Osiris's gaze did not waver. Your heart is heavy, he said, his voice quiet but resonant. Heavy with love, heavy with pride, heavy with the burden of a world that sought to crush you. Cleopatra's chin lifted. Then weigh me as I am, not as they would have me be. The silence stretched. Then slowly, impossibly, the scales balanced. A breath she had not realized she held left her lungs. Antony's hand closed around hers again, warm and solid, grounding her. Maat inclined her head just slightly. The heart is true. Osiris rose from his throne, the crook and flail in his hands gleaming with light. Then pass, queen of the two lands, he said, his voice like the roar of the eternal river. The duat is open to you. Beyond lies the field of reeds, where the sky is forever dawn and the Nile runs without end. Cleopatra turned to Antony. He smiled, not the weary, haunted smile of a man broken by war, but something younger, freer. Come, he said softly. It's time. Together, hand in hand, they stepped beyond the hall of two truths into the light that waited beyond eternity.
The palace was empty. Octavian Caesar, future emperor of Rome, strode through the halls of Alexandria with the confidence of a man who had never known defeat. His armor gleamed in the torchlight, polished and sharp, every detail reflecting the authority he carried like a crown. But even he could not have anticipated what awaited him. The air was heavy. The smell of incense lingered, though the altars had been abandoned. The sound of the Nile was muted, almost reverent, as if the river itself had drawn back to give space to something greater. Octavian paused at the entrance to Cleopatra's private chamber. The door was closed, though no one had dared lock it. A subtle tremor ran through the walls, faint but undeniable. He pushed it open. The room was silent. Candles had burned low. Torches flickered, casting elongated shadows across the marble floors. And there, on a bed of silk and ivory, lay the two figures of legend, Antony and Cleopatra. Antony's chest rose shallowly, his face pale but serene. Cleopatra lay beside him, her gown draped like water over the marble, her face calm, regal even, in death. The faintest trace of gold dust seemed to cling to her skin, remnants of a queen's glory that no conqueror could take. Octavian stepped closer, his boots echoing in the silent chamber. He reached out, as though to confirm that this was not a vision, but reality. They were dead. And yet, a flicker of something impossible caught his eye. The shadows around Cleopatra seemed to move, subtly, as if alive. Her hair, dark as the Nile at midnight, shimmered with a light that had no source. The air smelled faintly of lotus and myrrh, and for a moment Octavian thought he heard a whisper. "Remember me." He shook his head, dismissing the sound. The words could not have come from her. She was gone. Octavian's victory felt hollow. Rome had conquered Egypt, but even in the triumph, he sensed the weight of a story unfinished. A queen who had died free, whose legend would outlast empires. He ordered the bodies carried to the mausoleum. Soldiers moved silently, almost reverently, as though they too felt the lingering presence of something beyond the mortal. Outside, Alexandria burned. Smoke curled into the sky, black and thick, blotting out the stars. Yet the river continued to flow, steady and eternal, carrying the whispers of a queen and a general who had defied the world. In the days that followed, stories spread among the people. Whispers of shadows seen moving near the palace, of a golden light drifting across the river at night, of a queen who had vanished into eternity, leaving only memory and myth. Octavian heard the rumors and laughed quietly to himself. Rome did not believe in ghosts. Rome believed in power. But the river never forgot. And somewhere, far beyond the reach of Rome or Egypt, Cleopatra and Antony walked hand in hand through the eternal fields of the Duat, their love unbroken, their hearts unburdened, their story immortal. The field of reeds stretched endlessly before them. Not a field of grass, not a desert, not a city, but a place that carried the essence of life itself. The Nile ran through it, wide and silver, reflecting a sky painted with colors that no mortal eye had ever seen. Reeds taller than palaces swayed gently, their tips shimmering with starlight. Flowers bloomed in patterns that defied nature, glowing faintly as though lit from within. Cleopatra and Antony walked hand in hand along the riverbank. Every step was weightless, yet every footfall resonated like a heartbeat in the fabric of this eternal world. "I've never seen anything like this," Antony said, his voice carrying across the reeds. His armor had disappeared, replaced by simple robes of white linen embroidered with gold thread. He was free of war, free of blood, free of Rome. Cleopatra smiled. Her gown had become like water, flowing around her, catching the silver light of the river. She breathed deeply, tasting eternity for the first time. "This is the world we fought for," she said. "Not kingdoms or crowns, but peace, a world untouched by time." A figure approached from across the river. It was Isis, radiant as ever, her presence commanding and tender all at once. She did not speak at first. She simply watched the two lovers with eyes that contained all the wisdom and sorrow of the ages. "You have crossed the river, children of the Nile," she said at last. Her voice was music and stone combined, resonant in the eternal air. "You are free of mortal chains. Here your love will endure beyond kingdoms, beyond time, beyond the memory of Rome." Cleopatra bowed her head, tears of joy glimmering like morning dew. "Mother, thank you." "You do not need thanks. You have honored your lineage, your gods, and your people. You have proven that love can defy death itself." The reeds parted, revealing a vast hall built of light and water, where spirits of the past drifted in gentle currents. Pharaohs, queens, and gods mingled here, all basking in the endless twilight. Statues moved as though alive, and the air was filled with music, harps, flutes, and voices that hummed with the harmony of the universe. Cleopatra felt the weight of the mortal world lift entirely from her shoulders. Antony squeezed her hand, and together they stepped forward into the hall, where a throne awaited. Not a throne of stone or gold, but a place where they could sit and watch eternity unfold. "The river carries all things. and it carries you now. Here you are whole. Here you are eternal." The lovers sat, and around them the field of reeds shimmered like living glass. They spoke of their past, of Alexandria, of battles lost and won, of dreams that had been crushed by the hands of mortals. And yet here none of that mattered. Here there was only the river, the reeds, and each other. Overhead, stars moved in slow, perfect arcs, constellations unfamiliar yet comforting. Celestial birds of golden light circled, singing notes that echoed in every corner of the eternal world. Cleopatra leaned against Antony. "Do you think they will remember us?" she asked softly. Antony kissed her temple. "Perhaps. Or perhaps the river will remember us for them. That is enough." The Nile flowed around them, carrying whispers of life, of death, of gods and mortals alike. And in its waters, Cleopatra saw herself, not a queen fallen, not a mortal conquered, but a soul of Egypt, radiant and eternal, entwined with the man who had shared her fire and her heart. Time did not exist here. Days and nights, years and centuries were meaningless. Cleopatra and Antony wandered the field of reeds, exploring its beauty and marveling at its mysteries. They met spirits who had been kings and scholars, priests and artists, all drawn to this place for their own acts of courage, love, or wisdom. Cleopatra taught them the ways of Egypt, shared her stories, and in return learned the tales of others, a tapestry of eternity woven with mortal lives. At night, or what passed for night here, the Nile glowed like molten silver, reflecting the faces of lovers, gods, and heroes who had walked these waters before. Cleopatra and Antony would sit by the riverbank, holding hands, their laughter echoing across the reeds, a sound untouched by death. And in the distance, the mortal world faded further. Rome burned, Alexandria crumbled. The Ptolemaic line ended in history books and whispers. But Cleopatra and Antony existed beyond history, beyond myth, and yet entirely within it. They were eternal. And the Nile, the river that had carried their lives, their loves, and now their souls, flowed forever, whispering their story to anyone who would listen, mortal or divine, for all time.